So, welcome to a first really. This is an interview, a chat rather than an interview between Jackie and myself, um, thinking about loss and grief during this time of the pandemic. Um, Jackie is a trained counsellor and experienced pastor and has helped many people through loss and grief. But before we go into other people, Jackie, do you want to just share some of the personal experiences of loss that you've had during this pandemic time?
Okay, yeah. So I think when we first went into this pandemic, there was a sense of loss of general security. I was observing our world suddenly rushing out buying toilet rolls and pasta, and I was really challenged about how secure did I feel, and was I going to follow those ways of behaving. But practically, I think also just the routine of life. So suddenly finding myself in my dining room as my desk and working out lots of new technology. So I lost a sense of feeling competent in what I was doing for a bit. So the loss of routine, I think I've now just built a different routine. Um, but personally, I felt a huge loss of not being able to relate with or being able to see my grandchildren and children because they're fairly new babies, and so I knew that my daughters were really looking forward to me being involved in that, and so I've had to also help them or try to help them. We do a lot of FaceTiming now, so I get to see them, but I mourn those loss of being able to actually hold little people and feel intricately involved, and also being able to see my parents who are about 100 miles away, who are in their 90s, and I can't go and see them. I mean, they're doing okay. So the loss of those connections has been really big as well. So I think those would be what I think of as immediately the main ones of different areas of loss. And
Yeah.
what about you? What do you feel like your
So,
main losses have been?
um, so when lockdown started, quite quickly, we had to go into complete isolation for the 2 week period, and there was a massive loss of freedom. Of It was as if we were unclean, basically. Um, the children had some symptoms of colds and things, and it was as if we had done something really wrong, and we were being punished, and that kind of loss of freedom that we had to stay in, and Um, yes, we were together, which was wonderful, but there was that loss of just being able to go out and enjoy fresh air outside, going for our daily walk, our Boris walk, as it were. So there was that loss of freedom, and that's continued, even though we're not now in complete isolation, and we can go out for walks and things like that. There is a loss of freedom, and that's been a challenge. The loss of routine, as you said, is one thing. But I think the loss of dreams, or having to lay down plans for certain things. So we were going to visit my parents in Swansea. So uh, that was going to be over the Easter holidays, and we were going to spend time at Easter with Nikki's parents as well. And so loss of time or planned time with family,
Yeah.
and being able to hug them, being able uh, to spend time in close proximity to the people that we love, and then on a professional kind of way, and linked to work, I miss and feel the loss of being able to pastor people face to face.
Oh, me too.
It isn't,
Yeah.
yeah. I, I know from other conversations, both of us feel, and others feel, it isn't the same when we ring someone or send an email or see them on a Zoom call. You want to reach out and kind of give them a hug, or um, just physically be present, and that's hard
Absolutely. And I've
when,
experienced that actually just this morning with a family who've just lost their
yeah,
son. It feels inadequate, doesn't it, to not
yeah,
be able to go into their home and hold them. And a
yeah,
doorstep pastoral visit, which is something that we're now beginning to do, still has that huge sense of, I don't feel I'm quite doing this as well as I can, but actually, you know, your heart is still for them, and you know they know that, but it still doesn't feel good enough in terms of
Yeah, yeah.
what's my role. So yes, I totally understand.
And from your experience as a counsellor and as a pastor, you've helped many people through loss and grief, and not just through it, but recognize it and cope with the mixed bag of emotions that are involved in so many different kinds of loss and grief. What things are you bringing to this situation that we're in, right across the UK, right across the world? What things are you bringing in from that experience and study to help you help others understand things at the time at this time?
I think one of the first things I would just say is that we talk about loss, and we can talk about it like we are now without the emotion of it. Reality of loss, whether it's grief due to a loss of a person, a loved one, loss is multidimensional because we are dealing with the knowledge of the loss, but the depth of what that does to you as a human being. And depending on the relationship, the loss is felt in your being, and it's one of those things almost like you can't describe it unless you're in it. And actually everybody's experience of grieving loss, so if we're talking about death, is different. So when we are looking at a pandemic aspect of loss, there are so many levels and personal experiences of it. But I'd also add into that, you have two clear different things happen. You have the loss of whatever it is you've lost, like we've just said, loss of freedom, loss of hugs, loss of being able to do a job well. But there's your experience of that, even as a pastor, and I'm as a pastor, may be different. How do you
Mm.
experience it? What does it do to you? And I call those your hidden losses. And I
Yeah,
think it's helpful when we're supporting people in loss is to try to help them navigate through a complex, often hidden area of, well, you can explain to me you've maybe lost your job or you've lost your freedom to be able to go out. But what does that do to you? And perhaps why is it your experience? You know, when you lose say a mother or a father, which is a typical loss, you grieve the person no longer being on planet Earth, but you also grieve the fact that perhaps now you've gone up a hierarchy. You may now
yeah,
be the person who's seen as the next generation, and you lose that sense of looking up to somebody. So
mm.
you also lose the wisdom they may have given you, or hearing their voice, or just sense of order of your life. So those are things that actually you've got the obvious loss and then the hidden loss. And I'd say in all the different losses people are experiencing, you'll have the obvious loss. So even we've been talking with friends who are on furlough, so they've lost a job identity, they still have an income, but there's such a depth of emotion that goes with doing something. And so just, you know, that would just be one experience, and you could multiply that across so many other areas. But really, I'm
Yeah,
just saying it's personal, and we need to be able to understand it through other people's experience, help people to give them the narrative. How do they express it?
mm.
How do we allow them to navigate the pain of it, because loss is painful? And yet, how do we help people not linger there so long that it just takes you deep into either depression or a place that becomes almost insurmountable? I mean,
Yeah,
within the grief experience, you have, you know, people who are known to have talked about grief for a long time, people like Kubler-Ross, but there'd be many other people who've worked in areas of grief, and they say there are stages that people naturally go through, and we just know now that it's not a neat, you go through shock and denial and anger, and there's about six or so of those, or around that number, that people can talk about, but they're not linear, they all get mushed up together. And I think that's also true in our losses. We may find
mm.
ourselves one day feeling really sad, another day feeling really angry, another day trying to get somebody to make it better. Another day you're trying to point the finger at this is somebody's fault, because we're trying to find our way out of our pain. So it's such a kind of a whole mixture of things. So in helping people, it helps to understand those sorts of characteristics, but also help people walk through them and not allow themselves to just sit like a hippo in the mud and just wallow in it in a negative way. Obviously, a hippo likes being in mud, but most of us don't like it for too long, although there is an aspect where we just want somebody to hear us. We just need people to hear our pain. And so as pastors, we would want to help people know that they're heard, but also then help them to find a footing, some footholds to get out of it the other side.
Yeah. So when I was in primary education, I'm just going to start that bit again, Dave. Okay. When I was in primary education, I remember learning about supporting children going through loss, and whilst I remember the seminar. There was an image of a river that adults will typically journey through a river of loss and grief. Different adults go through it at a different pace and things like that. But with children, they may zoom through it, and then the next day or a few weeks back, a few weeks ahead, they go back into the river and then through it. And it's as if the way that we go through the process of dealing with it is completely dependent on who we are, where we are, what experiences we've had before, the age, the stage of life, etc. And then as I've become a pastor, I've realised that it isn't just children that jump back and forth in that river. There are some people who will go through certain losses with a slow trudge through that stream or river, and then others that will suddenly find themselves over the other side, and then a month later realise they're stood in the middle of the stream again.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing a Facebook post recently where someone said, "We're not all in the same boat at the moment.
No, we're all in the same
We're in the
storm, but not in the same boat."
Yeah, we're in the same storm, but not in the same boat." And as a pastor and as people who want to help other people, so not just us, but us helping others to help people, we need to recognise that there are different boats, different ships that people are in, but we want to help them move forwards.
Yes.
Towards a time where they're not in a storm of loss and grief.
Yes. I think though, as we support people who go through loss in death, one of the things we see almost always is that people need to go back over the story for them. They'll often need to talk about the person. And they can sometimes go, "Oh, you probably don't want to hear this again. I told you this last week." And my experience is we need to let people tell their story, but recognizing, if you like, that that's a healthy thing to do for a period. And it's very hard to determine what period length of time that is. Grief goes on. You don't get over grief. You just kind of work out how to live with it. And the same, I think, happens within the losses people are experiencing now. So a mum being at home with the children when they feel overwhelmed, how do you help such a person find a footing in that? You can look at the practical details, but it's also the emotional experience of a mum or a dad in that situation. How do you help somebody who's lost their job, who's terrified they're no longer going to have an income to support their family and therefore fear of losing their housing? As pastors, we have a responsibility to listen to these steps that they take on each of this part, walk it as much as either we can or we get other people to walk it because we can't do it all, but also hear that internal fears, and yet also encompass that with, well, how do you think God is seeing your experience right now? How do you expect God to help you right now. Because one of the things
Yeah.
that people try to do is just to jump to resolution. It's one of the things that people do in a transition. You know, you lose your safety in life over here, so you want to jump to safety over here. And then often people do that. You know, it can be practically very sorted, but actually they haven't dealt with all the emotions of the loss
Yeah.
from the first place that they were in, that they've lost all of these things. They're now trying to sort life, and that may be absolutely what they need to do practically, but it's more the internal journey, I guess, that obviously as a counsellor I was very much involved with, is going, well, what does it feel like now not to ... not to have a person in your life, not to have a job in your life. And one of the other factors I definitely found was that losses accumulate. So sometimes it can be seemingly the smallest of loss, like, I don't mean this demeaningly, but say like a pet dying, that suddenly
Hmm.
evokes a huge memory of the last time I felt like this was when my father died or I lost my job. That
Yeah.
sense of desolation. So
Yeah.
knowing that one loss will often bring up previous losses, and
Mm.
and therefore you're not just dealing with the now, what's the loss now, but you may find it brings up some of the others. And so trying to help people see what is the loss of now and how do you help them in that, but also not take away from the reality that actually is this possibly exposed something that never got dealt with well before. And
Yeah.
that's
So
the, sort of the bread and butter of being a counsellor.
yeah. So you mentioned there about listening to people's stories, and also you slipped in about asking or encouraging people to engage with what God is doing in this. Um, as soon as you said about the story and then mentioned God, I thought about, well, let's think about God's story and encourage people in God's story, not to kind of slam the Bible at them and say, come on, you shouldn't deal with the emotions, you should just read the word. But actually, it's what hope, what examples, what leading and guiding can and strengthening can God bring as we open up His Word, His story, and allow His Spirit to minister to us in the loss and grief of our story at present.
Yes.
Um, and I can think of examples of loss. For example, Joseph losing his example, sorry, his um, closeness with family as he was sold into slavery in Egypt, then he was in prison, etc. Um, what other stories in God's story in the Bible can you think could be helpful for people at the moment?
Oh, well, I mean, the New Testament, we know that people like Paul, I mean, he was such a man of passion, and in some ways, maybe it's not always helpful to compare to somebody like him. But you know, he got locked up. I mean, he was in a real lockdown, and we know that it was in that lockdown position that he wrote some of his most powerful pastoral letters to people. So I see that in somebody like him, there's a challenge to take what is really not ideal, being locked and probably shackled in his case to a prison guard, but choose to look at it through there must be another way to do this. There must be a place where I don't linger in self doubt and self pity, but actually say, Lord, what do you want me to do for others?
Mm.
I think there is a challenge in loss. We become very self focused rather than other focused, and that's okay. Whereas if you do it for too long, you then just become self pitying, probably.
The loss of loved ones. There are examples of David, for example, losing a son. Um, the on a kind of a deeper reading of Scripture, we've also got the example of God Himself, who has experience of loss and grief at the cross, losing um, closeness of emotion and connection spiritually and physical distancing from His Son, and Jesus the Son experiencing that loss and separation from the Father. But um, also when we think of God in the story of Scripture, we realize that there is also a theme throughout his book, his story, that says, "I'm with you, and I'm going to join you in your loss and grief. I'm going to join you wherever you are, but I love you enough not to leave you there. I I will join you enough to join you in that place and minister to you in that place, but I will take you at the right time to a better place, to a place where you can stand again, where you can rebuild your life again, where you have hope again, where there is light again, etc." And yeah, so I would encourage people to look at the examples in Scripture, but also look at the story of God in God's story throughout the
Right.
Bible.
I also
We've
was
got a
thinking about Mary, Jesus' mum. Actually, the number of losses that she went through in terms of, well, from the moment she knew she was conceiving, the loss of her experience of what she thought her marriage to Joseph was going to be about. You know, God, God interrupted that. But then I think of her right at the end. There she is standing, looking up at the cross of her son, and just the anguish that must have been. But I see Jesus right in the midst of that, saying, "John, look after her."
yes,
And I love that pastoral heart of Jesus
yeah,
to his mum, that he pass over care. And and so that's a very human, personal. I think people generally, as they look at scripture, may find a character easier to find an affinity to
okay,
than almost the encompassing of, well, how has God, through his journey and experience of losing his son, and the son, Jesus, losing a relationship with the Father at the cross, those can seem almost ethereal. It's a case of when you're
I,
walking with people, finding who are the characters that best help. And that used to be something that I would say in a counseling session if I was talking to a Christian. Are there any characters in the Bible that you feel akin to in
that's
your
really helpful.
journey? Who
Yeah,
is it that comes to your mind rather than me telling them? Because then, if you like, you become terribly teachery. But better to actually say, is there a character that you see is in some ways similar to you, and how did God help them? Do you believe God can help you? You invite them to try to see what is God maybe doing in these times. And it
that's
may be a bit out of kilter, but I actually do believe that in this pandemic, we still have these beautiful glints of goodness that we see. We've seen roads with WhatsApp groups and kindness, and can I get your shopping? Can I pick up your pharmacy stuff? We see a community being drawn into positives, and it's helpful, isn't it, to actually see where are the good things in the world, in our own experiences. I actually think my family, although I can't see them and hug them, we've got more connected in this time than possibly before. So perhaps there's also the question that we can say to people is, can you see any good gifts in this for yourself, for your community, for what God's doing?
yeah,
Just again to draw one's eyes above our own horizon to see from a God perspective. So loss is
cool.
loss and it hurts like heck.
Mm,
God knows it, we walk with it, we journey through it, but we also are saying, what is God doing in it and through you and in you, so that you're actually growing still as a follower of Jesus, believing that this was no surprise to him.
yeah. Thank you, Jackie. We're just going to come into land and bring this conversation to a close. But I know that we could continue talking more about this because there's so much richness in Scripture, but also in terms of people's experience and the different kinds of loss and things. Um, if someone was watching this from our community and they're not yet a follower of Jesus, um, but they recognise that their loss is real. We talked about recognizing the reality of the loss and what it is that there is loss. And then um, you said about the importance of listening to or having your loss heard by someone.
Hmm.
What would you say to them?
I'd say we, as followers of Jesus, identify with you. Just because we're followers of Jesus does not mean that all of a sudden these things don't impact us equally. But we have experienced the reality of a relationship with a God who loves us so that we don't journey alone. I think often people, when they don't have any faith, they just kind of feel like they've got to pull their socks up. They feel like they've got to take the positive language. And I'm not saying those things don't help in part, but I actually don't believe true healing and true peace comes without the relationship to our Maker and the security that comes from journeying with our Maker. So,
Yeah.
if you find this conversation helpful, at least it identifies for you that this is what your own journey is like, but you've yet to even believe that there is a God who cares about you, I would say, come and ask questions. Come and ask us why we believe what we do. I didn't always believe this. Didn't actually come into this relationship until very early 20s. I knew about God, but didn't know God. And so
Well,
I really would be encouraging anybody who is journeying this without God to ask the question of, is that real? Can I know him? And obviously people like Stephen and I were saying, yeah, he really is knowable. Obviously we don't see God like we're seeing each other, but we get to know him, what he was like. We see the story of Jesus in the Bible. Pick it up, have a read one of the Gospels, and get to actually see what Jesus was like when he was relating to people. He was incredibly different to what you might think he was like.
yeah. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for sharing your experience and your heart. We're going to sign off now, and do get in touch with us at the church. And if this has been helpful for you, if you've got questions, if you want to be heard, if you want to find out more, if you want Jackie or myself to give you a call, then do that. If you are helping someone through loss and just have a question that you want to ask for advice, not going into detail about that person, but just that you want some advice, do get in touch as well. We'd love to help you help others as well.
Yeah, so our
Thank you for
phone number is
watching.
on the website, isn't it? But it's also,
Yeah,
if we say it now, it's 01753 342 010.